Thank you again. It's a real honor to be with you all this evening. What I was asked to do was to speak for about 20 minutes or so about global health at the NCI, since I now have the privilege of directing the Center for Global Health at the National Cancer Institute, which Dr. Varmus initiated. And it's a real pleasure to be able to speak about some of what we're thinking now in this session that's really commemorating his leadership in establishing a center. So just to get a couple of things out of the way quickly, I won't dwell on this for this audience, but obviously cancer is a global problem, and particularly in low and middle income countries. So there are increasing global cancer deaths, and by 2040, 69% of these are anticipated to occur in low and middle income countries. And this is without COVID and based solely on demographic changes. That's shown here. And so the current burden in terms of cancer deaths is shown in the clear circles, and the 2040 projections are shown in the solid circles. And what you can see is the largest proportional increases in burden will occur in the lowest income countries, which will see a near doubling of cancer deaths between 2020 and 2040. And this is, of course, in health systems that are often already largely overstretched due to many other competing health priorities. Just to put this in perspective, in 2020, this equated to approximately 27,000 registered global cancer deaths per day. And that's compared with currently, I pulled this data down from the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation yesterday, approximately 8,000 reported global COVID deaths per day currently. So, obviously registered cancer deaths and reported COVID deaths are both likely substantial underestimates for various reasons. And this isn't to suggest that cancer is more important than COVID. As I'll talk about on the next slide, cancer control may actually not be possible without first achieving COVID control. But I think, we sometimes lose sight of how big a global problem cancer really is, given that it's enlarged slowly over many years and decades. So this is now superimposing COVID onto cancer. And I think we're still learning what the effects of COVID will be on cancer, both in high income countries and low and middle income countries. But I think it is clear that this is going to have substantial population level effects, and that those are going to continue for several years. So some of the best modeling data that I have seen thus far from a low and middle income country is this recent study from Chile, which is an upper middle income country with a strong public health sector. So what you can see is that they anticipate, this is a simulation model that is fit to publicly reported data. And you can see that across these 5 cancer types which they studied, they're anticipating a marked surge in cases in years to come between 2020 and 2030, most of that occurring before 2025. They also anticipate that this surge in new cases will be anticipated by worse stage distribution and therefore worse survival. So again, across these 5 cancer types, they're showing a reduction in stage 1 and 2 diagnoses and an increase in stage 3 and 4 diagnoses that is pretty consistent across all 5 cancers. And this will be accompanied by a reduction in the typical 5-year overall survival. And so what this, of course, results in is an excess of cancer deaths. So again, that's showing that here for these 5 cancers. And in Chile, this modeling suggests that there will be 3,500 excess cancer deaths approximately between 2022 and 2030. And this is really without considering treatment delays and without considering reductions in the quality of care. So, if anything, these data may be underestimated. Certainly many other countries, many other low LMICs have larger COVID caseloads and weaker health systems than Chile has. So, we probably can't overstate how important COVID is going to be on future cancer burden. And again, that's not reflected in the IARC 2040 estimates that I just showed you on the last slide. I always argue that COVID is superimposed on a history, I would say, of remarkable global cancer success, but also failure and inequity. And because so much of my own work before coming to the NCI was focused on clinical translational studies of lymphoid malignancies in sub-Saharan Africa, I often use Burkitt lymphoma as, I think, a prototypical example of success, failure, and inequity. So in 1958, the Irish surgeon Dennis Burkitt, who was living in Uganda, discovered a new human tumor, which he thought was a sarcoma, but which ended up being a lymphoma, of course, Burkitt lymphoma, what we now know as Burkitt lymphoma, and described this unusual craniofacial tumor in Ugandan children. Several years later, so 6 years later, he, after having sent tumor specimens to colleagues in London who examined these tumors by electron microscopy, they noticed that there were viral particles in these tumor specimens, and that ended up being named Epstein-Barr virus, EBV. So this was the first discovery of this new human tumor, the first discovery of this new human oncogenic virus. That led to efforts over many years to learn how to treat this tumor. This is John Ziegler from the pediatric oncology branch at the NCI, who traveled to Uganda to live there and learn from African colleagues how they were treating this newly identified human tumor, and then brought that treatment experience back to the United States, to Bethesda, where I'm sitting now. And so when he reported in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1977 that he was able to achieve the same treatment results as had been described in Africa among American patients with Burkitt lymphoma in Bethesda. Subsequently, c-Myc was isolated. So the characteristic 814 translocation identified by Ricardo Della Favro when he was still at the NCI. More recently, this has been accompanied by use of modern molecular profiling methods to really discern that the biology of this tumor really differs based on whether or not EBV is present. That is, Burkitt lymphoma can be caused by EBV, or there's a sporadic type which is not caused by EBV. And it's really the presence or absence of EBV that drives tumor biology, and this likely has therapeutic implications. And what has happened as a result of these decades of discovery is that this has allowed progressive therapeutic optimization. And this, again, is work that has been done in large part by the NCI. So this is from the lymphoid malignancies branch at the NCI, Lou Stout, Wyndham Wilson, Mark Reshevsky, and others, developing this new treatment regimen, this infusional R-EPOCH treatment regimen to treat children with adults with Burkitt lymphoma, which has resulted in really remarkable long-term survival in a multi-center study reported last year. Similarly, in children, the addition of rituximab to the standard chemotherapy backbone, the LMB regimen, has resulted again in really remarkable long-term survival that I think would have been thought to be impossible several years ago. And this has really resulted in a situation now where it's very difficult to do studies of relapsed and refractory Burkitt lymphoma in high-income countries because the treatment outcomes after standard first-line regimens are so amazing across a broad swath of children, adolescents, and young adults. I often say that this would have been a much more beautiful story if we had completed what I consider the natural next step in this line of inquiry, which is to take these decades of discovery and translate a broadly deployable curative solution back to the very children who helped initiate these decades of discovery. And I think we have still failed to do that. Many of us are very interested in trying to do this. And I say we haven't done this because during the decade that I lived and worked in sub-Saharan Africa, I routinely saw children who presented just as they did in the 1950s with about the same outcomes. And again, I think this is to some extent a moral failure and a scientific failure. So, to illustrate further, I think cancer research really has yet to meet the challenge of increasing burden in LMICs. And this is just one additional example that I'll provide. So this was a systematic review of oncology randomized controlled trials that were published between 2014 and 2017. This is a really nice recent paper that I encourage you to take a look at if you're interested. So these authors looked at English language reports of phase 3 studies testing any cancer-directed therapy. So there were 694 cancer randomized controlled trials in total. 636 of these were in high-income countries, 51 in upper middle-income countries, of which 42 were in China, 7 in low middle-income countries, 6 of which were in India, and 0 in low-income countries. And any scientist will tell you that if you have a biased sample, you get biased results. And so I think these results, the findings collectively from this collection of randomized controlled trials, these authors claim, and I think this is quite compelling, are biased in several important respects. These are poorly matched to global cancer burden. LMIC randomized controlled trials more often identify effective therapies with larger effect size. That is, when it's so much harder to do a cancer RCT in a low and middle income country, I think naturally investigators are much more selective and strategic and tend to prioritize studies that are more likely to demonstrate benefits. And then finally, when there isn't an interest in cancer clinical trials that are done in low and middle income countries, this often leads to a significant publication bias against those studies, even when they're completed and demonstrate important benefits. So just to illustrate that quickly, this is showing the top figure from this paper showing the top 10 cancers by mortality. And on the right, the top 10 cancers by randomized controlled trials. And you'll see that many frequently occurring cancers worldwide, in particular those that are common in low and middle income countries like liver cancer, cervical cancer, are very infrequently represented among oncology randomized controlled trials. This is showing, this is maybe a little bit hard to see, but although only 8% of randomized controlled trials were conducted in LMICs, these were much more likely, statistically significantly more likely to meet their primary endpoint with statistical significance and with a larger effect size as judged by the hazard ratio for mortality. And this is now just demonstrating quickly the publication bias. That is, because we're not supporting this work, it's a vicious cycle where we tend to find it uninteresting. That is, even when RCTs, even though it's much harder arguably to do oncology randomized controlled trials in LMICs, and they may be a better match for cancer burden globally, and they may be more likely to yield positive results with larger effect sizes, they are typically published in lower impact factor journals, and the higher impact factor journals tend to be really dominated by oncology RCTs from high income countries. So with all of that as background and really building on the foundation that Dr. Varmus established when he created a Center for Global Health, we've been thinking a lot about what this means for global health at the NCI going forward. And earlier this year, we, after a lot of work with NCI leaders and numerous stakeholders with consultation with Dr. Varmus and others, we developed a new strategic plan. This is publicly available on our website. And I think we really tried to go back and think about this original vision of CGH, which was to establish a Center for Global Health and to help integrate cancer control into global health. I think in 2021, what Ned Sharpless and I tried to argue in this paper in JAMA, which was really trying to outline the key themes in our strategic plan, is I think we're in a different place in 2021. No longer should we be thinking about integrating cancer control into global health, but cancer really has to be a global health priority. I think the numbers that I spoke to on the previous slides really speak to that. In addition, I think we're no longer trying to establish a center, we're really trying to evolve it so we as the NCI can try to meet the needs of the field going forward. So I always like to remind people that the NCI is a big, complex organization. The Institute was established in 1937 and re-established in its current form in 1971 by the National Cancer Act. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the National Cancer Act in addition to the 10th anniversary of the Center for Global Health this year. We really serve as a global health hub. So global health activity is distributed across the NCI. We are the only part of the NCI that has a primary focus on global health and thinks about global health from a transdisciplinary, disease agnostic kind of perspective. So we really think about what are the ways for the NCI to be most impactful globally in addressing cancer as a global health priority. Since we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the National Cancer Act this year, I always like to remind people that the National Cancer Act of 1971 actually explicitly directed the NCI and the NCI director to engage in global cancer research and control. And we've been trying to weave important global health stories throughout this year's commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the National Cancer Act. This is just a snapshot of the NCI International Portfolio currently. So this is the extramural portfolio, that is the funds that the NCI gives away to outside investigators to do research. And you can see that in 2020, we're finalizing the 2021 analyses now, approximately 13% of the NCI portfolio included international work. Most of that was foreign component awards, that is awards made to US institutions that have collaborating sites internationally. A much smaller proportion was direct international awards to institutions abroad. This is showing the spectrum of work that's represented in these grants, really across the cancer continuum and with numerous disease sites represented. And this is really showing the growth over time, roughly contemporaneous with the creation of a Center for Global Health. And certainly CGH wasn't responsible for all of this, but I think this is these are parallel and related developments. So you can see that the overall international portfolio of the NCI increased from approximately 9% in 2010 to 13% in the year that we've most recently analyzed, which is 2020, although the proportion of direct international awards to foreign institutions has remained small and somewhat flat. And that's where a lot of our interest lies at the Center for Global Health. This is just showing the geographic and income level distribution. So there's good representation really all around the world. And there's a clear gradient where many of these collaborations are with other high income countries. And as you move down the World Bank income classification, there's lower and lower representation of upper middle, and low income countries, very analogous to the randomized controlled trial portfolio that I showed you several slides ago. And these are just showing where the LMIC awards are distributed. The intramural portfolio, so this is NCI scientists doing their own research, is very similar with a number of projects, both in the Center for Cancer Research and the Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics, distributed all around the world and really across the cancer continuum and across disease sites. So I just want to speak briefly about some of what we're doing now at the Center for Global Health. So again, we this year published a new strategic plan and are really in the process of implementing that now. The NCI mission is to lead, conduct, and support cancer research across the nation to advance scientific knowledge and help all people live longer, healthier lives. We at the Center for Global Health support the NCI mission by advancing global cancer research and coordinating NCI engagement in global cancer control. We hope to see reduced worldwide cancer suffering through global scientific discovery and dissemination. And we've really oriented all of our programs around the core values of impact, equity, and collaboration. If you read our strategic plan, we've actually articulated what these mean to us. And these are not programs, but rather values. That is, they animate everything that we do. So all of our funding opportunities, when we hold scientific meetings and invite speakers, we're really thinking about equity, for example, in all of our daily work. And I think that's been really nice to approach it in that way, especially in this era. Our work is really oriented around 4 primary goal areas. We have a primary programmatic focus on low and middle income countries with the work that we lead at the Center for Global Health. We try to support research, and in particular, research that is addressing key scientific issues in global cancer control or leveraging unique or unusual scientific opportunities afforded by collaboration with global partners. We support research training that will enable equitable and impactful global scientific collaboration. We host a number of dissemination platforms and activities that are designed to promote the integration of current scientific knowledge into global cancer control policies and practice. And then we also serve as a partner. So we really represent the NCI and promote its engagement with key partners in global cancer research and control. Our research themes are really oriented around these. We hope to accelerate technology development for global cancer control. We have a number of programs in that area. We have a major effort now to try to accelerate global cancer implementation science, recognizing how important that will be for translating discoveries into policies and practice. We're really seeking to understand and address global cancer health disparities, increase support for cancer clinical trials and LMICs, and then increase understanding of cancer etiology and biology through global collaboration. And some of these areas are very well developed. Others are things that we're very actively thinking about, but I won't go into each of these programs in detail just in the interest of time. I did want to highlight a couple of examples of the types of research that we have been supporting and have an interest in continuing to support. So one example is we have an affordable cancer technologies program that we lead at the Center for Global Health. This has really been focused on validating and developing technologies that are applicable in low and middle income countries for global cancer control. One outcome of this has been the acceleration of portable thermocoagulator devices to ablate cervical precancer. So many of you will be familiar with the WHO cervical cancer elimination targets, which rest on having 90% of girls vaccinated, 70% of women screened, and 90% of those with precancer or cancer treated. As you all will know, treatment of precancer previously relied on cryotherapy, liquid nitrogen cryotherapy, which is a completely unworkable solution in rural parts of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, where maintaining a consistent supply of these pressurized gaseous cylinders, even for groups that have substantial resources and logistical know-how, is virtually impossible. And so we think it's been a really important development that the NCI has helped to support to accelerate the development of these battery-powered, novel, handheld thermal ablation devices. And grantees from the NCI provided data to the WHO that led to its very rapid adoption into worldwide guidelines for the thermal ablation of cervical precancer. Another study, just to illustrate that we're supporting from the NCI, is a study, a randomized controlled trial being conducted in multiple countries to evaluate a clean cook stove intervention. The primary outcomes of this study are really focused on infant pneumonia. So pregnant women are being enrolled, and the outcomes are mainly looking at infant pneumonia and growth. But we, as the NCI, are supporting corollary biomarker studies to evaluate the effects of this clean cook stove intervention on cancer-associated biomarkers. And this is just preliminary data from the trial demonstrating that at trial sites, they were able to achieve health-relevant reductions in particulate matter, and we're really eager to see the main and secondary outcomes of this trial reported in coming years. Research training is a big area for us. Our flagship program now is a program that where we made our first awards this year to strengthen institutional capacity for global cancer research at LMIC institutions, often in partnership with US institutions. We recently made the first 4 awards to African institutions working with US cancer centers that had rich research programs underway to really provide an ecosystem that would allow US and LMIC investigators interested in global cancer research careers to be trained. We support individual K awards for young investigators, both in the US and LMICs that are interested in developing mentored cancer research careers. We have shorter term experiential learning, both for the extramural community and the intramural community. Just as one example, through this short-term scientist exchange program, we recently helped to support a training collaboration between investigators at the NCI and investigators in India that led to the development of a new CAR T platform that is with the manufacturing occurring in India. And this has been really exciting to see this develop. Dissemination platforms that we support include the International Cancer Control Partnership, which I'll speak about on the next slide. We organize NCI participation in the International Cancer Screening Network. The NCI hosts a collaborating center agreement with the WHO, whereby we can provide scientific support to the WHO for its recent cancer-focused programs, touching on pediatric cancer, cervical cancer, and breast cancer. We host one of the larger and longest running scientific meetings focused on global cancer research together with ASCO, AACR, the Consortium of Universities for Global Health, and NCI designated cancer centers, which is the annual symposium on global cancer research. Next year in March will be the 10th year. Registration, call for abstracts are open, so I'd encourage any of you who may be interested to take a look at that. We also facilitate NCI participation in meetings organized by other partners. For example, next week is London Global Cancer Week, which is a week-long series of events hosted by various UK institutions every year. We felt that there was a real need to highlight global cancer research training based on our recent D43 awards and a lot of our interest in developing that portfolio further. So for those of you who may be interested, next Thursday, we'll be having a conversation about global cancer research training as part of London Global Cancer Week. The International Cancer Control Partnership is a group of multilateral stakeholders where countries that are interested in developing national cancer control plans can apply to be part of the ICCP and get technical assistance with the development, implementation, and evaluation of a plan. This includes numerous partners around the world, but is really organized and supported and coordinated from the NCI. And then just to talk briefly about some of our partnership activities, we work with other funders who are interested in cancer or non-communicable diseases through the International Cancer Research Partnership, the Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases. We work very closely with the NCI designated cancer centers and have tried to incentivize and document the remarkable growth in global oncology activities at the cancer centers over the last decade or so. We work closely with IARC, and then we provide international agreement and collaboration support for NCI. Just one example is earlier this year, the All Ireland Cancer Consortium Agreement, which actually dates back to the Good Friday Accords in the 1990s, was renewed earlier this year. And this collaboration between the NCI, Northern Ireland, and Ireland has led to a marked increase in cancer research productivity on the island of Ireland since the agreement was signed. This is the International Cancer Research Partnership, a collection of international funders that harmonize and share data about what is being funded. We estimate that this currently covers approximately 60% of all cancer research funding. This is publicly available and searchable. There's a very active effort now to try to recruit additional funders, especially funding agencies and LMICs that are not well represented currently. And then I just wanted to end by saying a word about the NCI Equity and Inclusion Program. So we're obviously living through in some ways, a very unique moment in time. Many institutions are reckoning with these sorts of issues, including the NCI, and Ned Sharpless established an Equity and Inclusion Program last year, which is very much dovetailed to the larger NIH Unite program. I co-chair the working group that is focused on making the internal culture at the NCI more inclusive and equitable. We have recently been quite forthright in analyzing our own data and sharing how low representation across various groups is, both in the extramural and the intramural portfolio at the NCI. And again, there's a major institute-wide effort now to address this. And certainly we have been making the case, I think, repeatedly, that our global health activities are really connected to this larger effort. They're not duplicative or the same, but there's certainly important, I think, scientific and philosophical synergies between this larger effort and our global health activities at the NCI, which we've very much been trying to acknowledge. So it's the 10th anniversary of Center for Global Health. We've tried to use this as an opportunity to really celebrate global health at the NCI through a new seminar series, which I'd invite all of you to participate in if you're interested in social media, trying to have these informal global cancer conversations with key thought leaders, including Dr. Varmus, who of course initiated the center. And I know in part what we're here to do today is to really acknowledge him for the leadership that he has role that he has played globally. He's been nice enough to connect with me on a number of occasions since I started, both to revisit the original vision of the Center for Global Health and also think about what's different and what's new and how we must evolve going forward. We had, I think, a delightful conversation also about the ways in which global health activities connect to some of the larger health equity considerations that are getting so much attention recently. And I've always found it incredibly valuable to have a few moments to check in with him about some of what we're doing. That's it. I'd invite all of you to check out what we're doing at our website, Twitter handle, my email, my Twitter handle. And again, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to participate in this session today to acknowledge Dr. Varmus's contributions. I've been saying throughout the week, that he helped me find a new job. And I think I mean that not only in the sense that I'm now the Center for Global Health Director, but also in the sense that when CGH was first created in 2011, I was a fellow. And I think that signal from the NCI that this was something that the NCI was really interested in really paved the way for a lot of institutions to escalate their commitment to support the careers of young scientists that were really interested in developing global health careers. And so in many respects, I think my career and my current job would not exist without his leadership in 2011 in creating CGH. Thanks so much, everyone.